The next is exporting the final master, right? So this is where we go into understanding bit depth and dithering, okay? And how you apply dithering and what is dithering, right? And how you export the actual master, right? So this is the process of that. And how you do that as opposed to exporting individual masters, right? Because you may do some editing and some things for the CD production that actually you want to do differently for the actual single release, right? You may chase a fade if two songs overlap each other on a CD, then the fades and the way that they fade out or fade in is actually going to be different or going to sound weird if you take one of the songs away, right? Because you're making them overlap each other. So you may need to actually export the individual masters with a separate mastering process, right? And depending upon what format it's going to, if you're going to iTunes or like to MP3 specifically, you want to do some tests, right? So you want to take the file, burn it as an MP3, and listen to it and compare it up against the full frequency file and see how much it changes. Because sometimes when you get to that MP3, you'll realize that something like it adds a little bit of annoying, frequency or something, in the upper mid range, or it does something a little bit strange with the low mids or something. And you may be able to compensate for that in the mastering process, right? So that you get the best results out of your MP3 conversion, right? Or for the conversion for AAC conversion, right? For iTunes, right? With that. And then, when you're dealing with that, you have to also deal with the metadata, right? And everything, right? So there's all kinds of stuff that goes along there with that. So let's go over a little bit of bit depth and imaging, right? So normally your master mixes will be at whatever sample frequency, and pretty much at this point, because of processing technology and computer technology, you should be able to do everything at 24-bit, right? And this will give you the highest, or basically the best audio quality. Now, there's 32-bit processing, but nobody is really, or not that I know of, is dealing with actual 64-bit files or 32-bit files. And it's not really necessary because, although it does add to the resolution quality, that ends up being a better deal in the processing stage. So the 64-bit or 32-bit processing gets more to the plug-in processing technology and the mix technology as opposed to the actual audio file. So your original files will probably be in WAV format, WAV file format. There's a broadcast WAV file format, which is the professional standard, right, of WAV format, because there's several versions of it. But your sample frequency should always be the same as the session, the bit depth as high as possible. And so when you actually go down to a CD, though, the CD is actually defined at 44.1 kilohertz and 16-bit, right? So now what happens is we're losing resolution in this process of converting from 24-bit to 16-bit. Now, part of every A to D conversion stage, whether you know it or not, is a process called dithering. And dithering is adding noise, right, into the audio signal, a very, very low-level noise into the audio signal. And that dithering can have a varied frequency response. It could be equal across the frequency spectrum. It could be optimized within particular frequency areas, right? However, right, so the dithering, this noise that's added in, helps to actually make the sound quality more pleasing, okay? And what it does is it helps to eliminate quantization error. So if you have an audio signal, right, and you take samples, right, and you take samples at all these different points along the way, right, we're just going at 44,100 cycles per second. What happens is that the audio signal actually gets quantized off, right? It gets cut off. So we get these square waves, we get these transitions, because we have these individual samples and we play back a burst of audio here, burst of audio here, burst of audio here, burst of audio here. And so we have this sort of transition. It just happens really fast, right? And we're going back and forth, right? So this is what the actual output audio signal looks like. Now this would be an extremely high frequency, right? So this is, you're not going to get it. It's more on a subtle level, right, that you would see this type of thing. But in this quantization error, you get like some hardness that's kind of added into the sound. if it's 16-bit, then the accuracy of each of these measurements is not going to be as good, right? So when we measure at 24-bit versus 16-bit, it's the accuracy of each measurement. So essentially what each sample is a measurement of voltage, right? Of actual voltage, right, on the A to D conversion stage, right? So how much is that? So does that voltage equal 1.23005 whatever, right? 8, right? Maybe that's a 16-bit word. And maybe a 24-bit word is, 23005863215, right? Maybe that's 24-bit, right? To give you an idea, right? So the accuracy of each of these measurements is closer to what the original is. And so what happens is when we go here, we lose some of this extra resolution, some of this extra accuracy when we go from one level to the other. So what they found is by adding random noise in, you actually create some random movement here, which actually makes these measurements less accurate, right, on the lower end of the bit structure. But that unnatural movement, because most of this very low end energy, right, most of that detailed energy, most of that 24-bit stuff, right, is way down in the sound scale. So this is mostly like mostly noise anyway. It's reverb, right? It's early reflections. It's a lot of this real energy that gives a sense of presence or space, right? And so by adding in random energy, random noise in here, when we move this from here to here, what ends up happening is that we could preserve some of that natural randomness up here in an area where it wouldn't naturally exist as much. And the end result is that you get something that sounds smoother and more natural, but at a lower bit structure. So dithering is only done, really, you should only really do it when you're down sampling, right? Or when you're going from a higher bit structure to a lower bit structure, right? 24-bit to 16-bit, so you end up on a CD. And what this will do, essentially, if you could just define it in a very simple way, you're adding noise in, or randomness, right? Which preserves some of the depth and clarity of the 24-bit recording in 16-bit format. Otherwise, what will happen is if you have your individual samples and you just go without any dithering, right? So these are all of our, you're just truncating it off. You're saying this doesn't exist anymore, right? You're just truncating if you don't dither. If you dither, then you're changing some of these lower numbers down here, randomizing them, and that gives you the sense that some of this stuff actually still does exist. So it's actually psychoacoustics, right? Psychoacoustics is really the whole idea of it, right? So it's kind of fooling the brain. And the brain is very used to noise, right? We have very noisy environments on every level, right? And when you go down to the, quantum level, everything is just so crazy, like it's almost all empty space, right? So what seems really solid isn't really solid at all. It's all energy, right? It's actually very, 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 very little physical matter, so it's sort of this crazy, weird world that we live in, but our perception of everything has a randomness to it, right? So all these laws of physics that we've created, like theoretically, if you roll a ball down the road, it should just keep rolling forever. But no, there's resistance, and there's all kinds of resistance along the way. So the classic thing is the dice, right? You roll a die, and there are all these things, different on the floor, on the actual die itself that are not perfectly even, on even the most microscopic level. And that creates variations, right, which makes it fall one way versus the other, right? They add up. And so that's like a noise factor, right? So these rules apply mathematically and theoretically, but they're always adjustable. And that's why quantum physics is such a powerful thing, because quantum physics factors in all of that stuff, and it deals with probabilities of how something will happen, right? So without getting into the quantum explanation of dithering and how it works, the bottom line is that we are very much more used to randomness in our environment than exactitude in our environment. And that's why digital is very unnatural in many ways, right? And so what they've had to do is play with digital in many ways to make it sound more natural, right? But that's kind of the way that works. So the dithering is always applied on the end, okay? And it's a very, very subtle effect, right? And usually when you get to the dithering, depending upon the plugin, they'll usually have like a variety of different options right with it here. So here, like with the waves, you have the ability to quantize down to whatever bit depth, right, from 24 to 16, anywhere in between. They have a couple different types of dithering, right? You could have no dithering, right, which would just truncate. And then two different types of dithering, and then within each type, and the way they do it is like this is for, for going for more complex music. One is for more open music. Actually, on the lower plugins, they go down to 8-bit. They actually work slightly differently. The shaping, right? You could have shaping of the actual noise that's added in, so you can actually apply these different characteristics. On some of the plugins, it's actually really cool because you can actually see the physical way, like the equalization curve that they apply. And therefore, you could shift the noise to less areas where it would be covered up by the rest of the audio signal, right? And either way, the randomness is created, right? But it's very, very cool. Right? It's a very, very cool thing, and it does actually work. It does preserve some of the audio quality, a good amount of the audio quality as part of the process, right, and the transference process, right? So dithering, so we'll get into that in some more detail. And that's it. So this is kind of like the exporting the final master, whatever it's for, right, and doing the conversion of that, right? How do you deal with that? Like once you actually get it out there, how do you convert it? What's the best way to convert it to this file format or that file format as you need it for different things, right? Including dealing with the metadata, right? And how you manage the metadata, right? So and that's basically it. So actually that was actually it should be class 8 there, and it says class 7. Okay, so this is the mastering schedule. Classes start on February 7th. And actually, the way the schedule works out, because there's 28 days in February, it's 7, 14, 21, 28, perfectly through. And this will be every Thursday, starting next Thursday, right, through the end of March, right? So this will be a good one. Somewhere in the later stages of this, I'm going to give you guys the option. You could do it anywhere along the way, but I would say hold on to it till we get closer to the mastering phase with the CD, right? So maybe the last half of the workshop, where we download a software, like there's a couple that have a 30-day trial that you can load in on your computer and actually use as part of the workshop, right? So thinking about WaveLab, because I believe it has a 30-day trial, full use trial. And so that way you could use it for 30 days and we could actually go through some projects together, right? And I'm working on getting some music that can have that you guys download and master and work with, right? And that way we could do similar thing to what we do with the mixing workshop, where now you guys have the multi-track and you could start working with the multi-track files, right? So that's the basic thing there. So there you go. There you have it.